We're live.
We're live.
Welcome back to the Footnotes podcast. This is episode 17.
11:17.
um, good to see y'all. Good to see you, June. Yeah. So we're on break now. I think. Are you on break? I'm on break.
Yes, we're both on break.
Cool. Just taking it easy. It's kind of funny because we didn't really talk about hanging out.
Oh yeah,
Break.
we hang out kind of
Yeah. This is this is our mode of staying
hanging
in touch.
out.
So.
Yeah.
I don't know. We
I
can,
when I think about Paul, I just envision his face,
of
the Google Hangout screen,
course,
and that's who he is to me now.
disembodied. Sometimes I'm looking at notes while you're talking, so like you're just a disembodied head to me, or
Yeah.
disembodied voice, the voice of June. But yeah, New Year's is coming up, so in a couple days we're going to be entering 2019. One of the things that I'm really not excited about is
Uh-huh.
going to the gym when I get
Oh,
back on January. The New Year's resolution people come up.
right.
Uh, So I'm thinking of going to the gym at like 6 a.m., which is gonna destroy me, but it's like the only way I'm gonna actually get a proper workout.
hmm Or you could be there at your regular times and assert your dominance by hugging the machines and um, yeah, just staring down all those non-swole New Year's resolutioners.
Of course, it's all about the dominance, right? Like when you go to the gym, you're supposed to be the dominating figure. It's like a jungle. You gotta
Of course.
be on the top of the food chain,
Mhm.
man. What are you excited about for 2019, June?
What am I excited about?
Yeah.
I mean, to me, I don't think much changes. Um, yeah, I think nothing significant in my life changes as a result of the calendar year changing. I think a more significant landmark for me, like, is probably is probably like the school year.
Mm,
But to give like not a complete cop out answer, um, I am I am going to try a new workout and dieting regime. So so I've been really into Tim Ferriss's books. So after the 4 hour work week, I bought the 4 hour body. Um,
wow.
and so here's a basic premise of the book. Um, he says, fuck you to a lot of conventional fitness rules,
Right.
as is his philosophy and as is mine. And he describes basically in a period of a month where he spent a total of 4 hours working out in that month. So like 30-minute workouts times two every week, and then for 4 weeks, and how following his and the workouts are very simple, like there's two main exercises and you do one set till absolute completion or exhaustion.
Mm.
And after 4 hours of that and following his meal plan, he gained 30 pounds of muscle mass in 1 month. So via 4 hours of working out. So that's kind of the premise that drives the title of the book.
Right.
Um, and so that's going to be my experiment.
That makes me very skeptical. So a 30
Yeah,
pound gain in weight, in muscle
yeah,
specifically, in 1 month seems like a Herculean task. And not only that, he only works out 30 minutes
yeah,
twice every
mhm,
week.
yeah.
That
So
makes me mad for some reason. I just get this like visceral reaction.
yeah, it's either this guy is full of shit, or why have I not been given this clear-cut advice before? Because as you'll remember from our beach swole days,
Yeah.
um, we had a fairly somewhat well thought out meal plan. We meal prepped. Um, we went to the gym, I think, 3 times a week. Uh, probably worked out for like an hour each, and I logged my weight during that entire year. And it's flat. It's basically flat, right? So a part of me just assumed, oh, I just must not gain weight, or it's something about my metabolism. It's something about a limitation. But no, I think reading the 4-Hour Body, it makes me want to test some of the principles he lays out. So one of the interesting things that I've been going to the gym like every 2-3 days according to that schedule over the break as like a trial run. I got a trial at Good Life Fitness for that. So one of the interesting principles is you do a 7-rep set of whatever like incline shoulder press or bench press or something, and the key is to figure out the weight where and the rhythm is kind of, you go up 5 seconds and then down 5 seconds. That's kind of the rhythm to get like maximum working of your muscles at all times. And the goal is to, by the end of the 7 reps, feel as if you're pushing up against something that you are having a lot of trouble with, that you're like absolutely screaming and struggling with. But if held at gunpoint, you'd be able to overcome it. Right? So it's kind of pushing your body to a point of, absolute exhaustion just for that one moment. And the theory is that generates maximal growth. And I've had 2 workouts like that so far, and like I feel great afterward. My body feels like the way it should after a workout, or the 2 days after when I'm recovering, and it's still sore. And I think those are good signs that I am getting literally ripped. My muscles are getting ripped. And then there's a whole diet portion that contributes to the 4-Hour Body, but I'll roll that in slowly in the new year. So that's what I'm looking forward to in 2019, experimenting with that.
Does the diet align with your ketogenic diet that you've been working on for the last few months?
Yeah, so he does something called the slow carb diet, which is like a modified version of the ketogenic diet, right? So he avoids all white foods. So no white bread, no white rice, no simple carbs that are very easily absorbed in your GI system and raise your blood glucose. And instead opts for slow carbs like beanie starches. And the theory is that those will get absorbed and converted slower into your bloodstream, into glucose, so that your blood sugar doesn't spike, so that insulin doesn't pump out and stimulate your fat generating response,
right?
Which is a role of insulin. So that's kind of the diet I'm looking to shift to in 2019, and hopefully I'll have some great results for you and our podcast viewers. Because
I think that's what we all want. I'm sure the audience wants a jacked and ripped June to be talking about his psychedelics and his many thought experiments.
Well balanced.
Well balanced. Okay, that's the goal here. I'm looking him up actually. I'm looking at Tim Ferriss, and he looks pretty healthy. He's a healthy looking guy.
Yeah.
So the second result is Tim Ferriss and his scam, but that's okay.
Yeah.
We'll see if it really is holds up.
Yeah. You got to test it for yourself though. That's been my philosophy. You can say fuck you to conventional rules and everything, but if you don't have the results to back up, whatever alternative thing you're doing, then that's probably a waste of your time.
You're just fucking yourself.
I'm fucking myself, but not a bad thing to do in the whole in the bigger picture.
Right.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Well, yeah. What are you looking forwards to in 2019? What's the game plan?
So I don't usually do these New Year's resolutions.
Yeah.
I'm one of those contrarians that are like, oh yeah, like I'm with you on that one. Like it's just a new year. Like it doesn't really mean anything, but we can add value to it, right? For sure. I think this coming year, like I do want to work on my body and mind more. Um, Classic thing that people want to do. But I think another thing that I want to do is try to actualize myself a bit more. So what that means is, like, I don't know how to express this, but I feel like I've been repressing a lot of myself, and I've been pushing down a lot of the things that I genuinely feel because I don't feel like it's it's good, or I don't feel like it'll be accepted among other people, or things like that. So one of the prime examples is when I'm writing music. So I've been trying to write music for like a year and a half. It's been about that long since I released my first song, which I wasn't even that happy with to begin with. But during that year and a half, I've written about 7 or 8 partial songs, and there's some music to them as well, and the lyrics are all right. But when I sit down to write, I always think to myself, what would say the most about myself? Like how would that music really translate what I'm feeling and what I'm thinking? And I always get stuck there because I feel like I feel like what I'm going to write is not going to be a good representation of myself, and also it's not going to be accepted very much by the community. Um, and so even though I have all these songs sort of written, I'm never going to release them. I just don't feel comfortable releasing them, and I don't think they're that good, right? And I think that's sort of restrictive because if you don't go through with what you are, and you don't produce what you sorry you don't release what you produce, then you're always going to be stuck in that zone of being afraid and being worried about what other people think. um, and so I think I'm going to really try and be more of my genuine self, and that's I think that's been a difficult thing for me all my life, to be honest. But I'm trying to slowly start with some things that are tangible. So with my music, try to be more honest with it, and try to be more authentic. And then maybe I'll move on to other aspects of my life, which are a little more complicated, like my career. Like I don't always feel like medicine is the career for me. And I'm always trying to find out ways to incorporate myself into the the ideals of medicine, if that makes sense. So instead of pursuing something that I am interested in, I am trying to fit myself into the molds of what medicine should look like. Although I'm sure there are avenues that I could find that are more conducive to me being my genuine self, if that makes sense. So that's one of the things that I'm hoping to explore in the new year.
So you mentioned that through your songs and your music, you want to express certain parts of yourself or your experience. Like,
Mm-hmm.
what are those parts and experiences that you want to express? Like, what part of you do you want to express?
Mm-hmm. I think there's this side of like um, it's mostly about love. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and the thing about love is that for me, I'm not ashamed a lot of the times to feel certain ways about someone, or
Mm-hmm.
um, like it's a weird feeling. Like I don't want to be in love, but I also enjoy it uh, a lot. And I don't know, like as I grew up, I think what I was taught to be was to be more stoic and to be less passionate about things like this. But when I write music, I just a lot of that comes out. It's like repressed essentially. And so that's one experience that I think is something that I'm holding back. And
Loving,
another thing is,
loving things, or
sorry.
loving people, love in general, romantic love. Like, what kind of love is
Right.
this?
Um, I think it seeps into a lot of things. The first one I think is love of people, and the second thing is love for things or love of doing certain things. And the reason why is because when I was younger, I was actually sort of told to not be the best in the room, like just to not be, not to stand out because then I
Don't
wouldn't
stick
make
your head
friends.
out
I wouldn't.
in a crowd.
Yeah, it's essentially blend in, right? And I think with that mentality, I never really explored the things I was good at. Like I knew I was good at math when I was young,
Hmm.
but I never found myself going and like entering contests or learning more about complex math, and I never pursued these things because I thought, what's the point? Like I'm not going to. It's not going to help me fit in. It's not going to make me. Um, it's not going to make me a better person. It is was my mentality, and I think in doing so, I quelled a lot of what I could have been good at. Like I quelled a lot of my potential, and now most days I sort of just sit around and just do work for the sake of doing work and get by without doing things I actually want to do. Um, yeah, so it's a big thing, really, and I think I'm realizing it recently. So hopefully it'll get better.
Hmm. And something I think I've noticed too, a little bit more, especially with I think my fuck you mentality is a symptom of that.
Hmm.
Is I've been finding that I have less patience for doing the things I don't enjoy because the qualitative differences between what I enjoy and what I do enjoy, it's like the gap's growing larger.
Hmm.
Maybe in high school or something like that, or in undergrad, I could tolerate it. I could justify it, saying this isn't going to be the rest of my life. Just keep your head down and study for 2 weeks, and you're on break.
Hmm.
But but as soon as you're given the opportunity, the freedom to choose what you want to do, then you realize, wow, how many of the things I'm doing in my day-to-day life, like how many of those are like shitty? How many other things would I rather be doing in that time? So I think, yeah, I don't know if you feel the same way, but I've been getting less patient,
Mm.
and I want to pursue the things that like I really love.
Yeah, no, I totally feel that. And when I was studying for my exams this past semester, like man, there were so many days where I just said, "Fuck it." Like I'm not doing this. There's no point.
Yeah.
I'd rather be out there shadowing a doctor rather than sitting down and reading books all day. And some days that's what I did, right? So um, it's hard for me to grapple with that too. I think there's a sort of idea in Asian culture where you have to just keep your head down and trust in the system or trust in the advice of your seniors, your parents,
Mhm.
and you just execute the work that you're given. Like sometimes that's the philosophy that gets you through, and I think it has gotten me pretty far in life. I'd say, so there's definitely merit in that, but of course, it's not as sustainable as some people think. I think it might have been sustainable if I just kept with it forever, but living in North America, living in Canada, like I feel like I'm woke. Like I'm a little more woke,
Yeah.
or maybe it's like that in all parts of the world now, but I just don't feel like keeping that up is going to be sustainable for long term.
Mhm. So what's the alternative? What do you want
Man,
to change?
that's so tough, dude. Well, I honestly think that I should trust myself a little more,
Mm.
because I'm in this like sort of limbo zone where I'm like, okay, do I just keep my head down and just do work, or do I drop everything and just pursue what I want? I'm not doing either of those. I'm sort of in the middle, saying, okay, well, I'm still gonna get my work done. I'm not gonna like it, and I'm probably not gonna spend as much time as I need to on it, but I'm also going to like experiment with some things that I enjoy for myself and spend time that way. And the podcast is probably one of those things. But I think the goal is to eventually move towards, okay, well, I everything that I want to do, that I want to pursue, I will. And in doing so, if there are things that I have to do that I don't enjoy, but eventually contribute to the things I want, then I will do those.
Yeah.
And that makes it worthwhile. But I really need to make the connection between the things I want to do and the things I have to do to get what I want. Does that make sense? So
Yeah.
I think that connection is missing right now, and I'm just doing shit for the sake of doing it.
Right. Yeah, I think you like definitely need that connection or that association between what I'm going through and the rewards it might bring. Because going through it, it's not like very obvious. So for the winter break, I wanted to go on like a kind of vacation, right? Maybe I wanted to go to a tropical location again, or maybe go scuba diving, yeah, with my dad, because that's something he likes to do, and I think that something that would be cool for us to do. But my parents are in Korea right now. I didn't really plan a big vacation, and it would have been ridiculously expensive because it's like peak season.
Yeah.
So I've been staying in Toronto, but the kind of mindset that I've been approaching it with is, all right, why don't I treat myself as though I'm on vacation in Toronto? So I've been taking like Uber rides, like whenever convenient, whenever it like dramatically increases my quality of life. Because those 15-minute walks and waits to the TTC bus stop is shittier than I thought. So I'm like, fuck it, do the Uber. And in the city, there's like express pool options that keep the cost to like $6, which is only like two bus rides, right? Which is a pretty insane. And I've been going to a lot of all-you-can-eat restaurants. I went to all-you-can-eat sushi, all-you-can-eat Chinese buffet, all-you-can-eat Japanese barbecue last night. We're doing Korean barbecue tonight, but at my house. So, like, I've been indulging. I've been playing a lot of video games with my cousin, I like League of Legends. Like I've been having so much fun, right? And like, a part of me wants to feel guilty about it. Why aren't you doing work? Like, you should be doing this, or there's so many better things you could do with your time. But I don't think that like self-critical voice is always helpful, because really experiencing the times like where you feel pampered, where you feel like just where you're like having fun, where you're so engaged, like those are the kind of valuable experiences you draw from for energy, like going into whatever menial things you have to do, and when you don't give yourself the opportunity to even experience those fully, like even if we're on like a 2-week break, which isn't that much, then I think you really miss out on a chance to make that connection between the work you have to do and like the life you want to live, or the kind of experiences you want to have. So I'm trying to unrepress myself in those ways, but not too much. I know that there's like this internal switch in me that's gonna go off and be like, all right, June, school's starting. Let's get back into that rhythm of things. So yeah, I want to encourage myself and others to really engage and like not feel guilty about like doing things you love, like indulging. There was one article I read this week that had a really good analogy. So it was a piece written about leadership, and I think there's a CEO of a company who writes on Medium, and for some reason, like he was on vacation or something in Africa, so his hotel or wherever he was staying, the view was of the savannah, and he was kind of meditating as per his morning ritual, and he was grappling with this issue, and the issue was, how can I become a more effective leader? Like I want to give more to my work, to the company, and to the employees. Like, how
Mm-hmm.
can I do that without becoming bitter and resentful? So he was thinking about that problem while he was meditating. Like he meditated for an hour, but no magical answers come because, you know. And then he kind of opened his eyes and he saw a big acacia tree in the distance. And when he was there, the acacia tree was in full bloom. So all the insects and tiny little animals were there to, you know, get its nectar, and like the sun was shining and like the colors were brilliant on the tree, and like it was just a very vibrant scene. And it reminded him like, wow, the tree is like always giving so much. It's like the giving tree. And on the surface it seems like it's giving without receiving, but then he realized, no, like there's the flip side to that entire tree. Like there's an entire other tree that forms the roots, that's taking and sucking as much as it can out of the ground it's from. So
Right.
it's getting nourished and taking so much, and that's why it's able to give so much, because it knows how to, well, treat itself and be generous to its like own growth and own blooming. So I think there's a lesson to be, you know, learn from that. It's not that you should be like only hedonistic and only enjoy life. It's like, no, like when you can properly enjoy life, then you can properly give back too.
Mm. That's a really interesting idea. Like it's a common idea too, right? It's and it's spread across different, let's say, fields or different domains. So what I'm thinking of is the idea of cash flow, right? Cash flow is very important to keep the economy going. There's nothing worse than keeping your money just in your under your bank account and nothing else. You got to make money, you got to spend money, and that's what gives the economy life. And I think that spreads out in all respects of life. I'm getting a little bit of feedback, so I'm just kind of stuttering a little. But yeah, so I think that's fascinating. And another thing is, I wanted to mention that indulging in some of those pleasures is a good way to remind yourself of what kind of life you want to have, right? It's brief moments of paradise that remind you that paradise could exist.
Yeah.
And of course, that's very good motivation for you to work towards getting to paradise as well. What I find interesting also is that this idea is not new to a lot of people. And like a lot of people go through this and be like, okay, yeah, of course, during break, you're just gonna, you know, you're gonna go to Cancun or something and you're gonna spend money and you're gonna have a good time, and then you come back and do work. Like that's just how it is. I just find it very fascinating that you and I are so hung up over it. I think it has to do with maybe our upbringing or our culture or maybe even just our personalities, that we find it to be so like such a guilty pleasure, and it's just naturally hard for us to really accept it and to indulge in it as much as we can.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's definitely a large part of our education and upbringing has led to this kind of pleasure, bad, work, good mentality.
Right.
And it's a simple, you know, dogma that helped us get to this point without becoming too distracted, let's say, because those indulgences and peaks of paradise can be very distracting. But I think there are, you know, there are pathologies of pleasure, right, that should be avoided and should be warned against, right? Like if you're just gaining pleasure for the sake of having pleasure and only seeking pleasurable experiences, it's like that person who keeps all their money in the bank you're just accumulating money for the sake of accumulating money,
Right.
instead of letting that flow and contributing, that value and energy, whatever, back into the economy, right? So, we should be conscious to say, all right, any love, any pleasurable experiences, the things that we receive, emanate that outwards, and let that. It's like playing hot potato, but with feelings of warmth and love and gratitude. But it's not like a linear hot potato. It kind of emanates. It kind of multiplies, right? It has a multiplying effect when you can really draw energy from like the things that you really love and appreciate, and then when you start giving that back, you can really have kind of exponential effects. So all that is to say is, I think pleasurable experiences, indulgence, can be a good investment for you, as long as you know what your end aim is. You want a distributed paradise on like actual Earth, and not just brief sneak peeks that you get to experience.
Right. Not on some cloud where you can fall off at any moment. Yeah, that's really cool. So I want to talk about something else as well. So I sent you this doc a couple days back about the ideas that I was having for the past week or so. And I wanted to get your input on it, your feedback. So the idea is something called the mental ecosystem, and the idea is around. So I'm getting feedback. I'm just gonna. Can you mute? Do you mind?
Okay, I will mute.
Thank you. All right. I don't know why it happens just randomly, but so the idea of the mental ecosystem, it's sort of this idea I had on the bus to Waterloo. Actually, I was going to meet an old friend, and I was thinking about like what would it be like how am I going to kind of relate with this person again? Like it's been so long since we've seen each other. Like I've sort of forgotten how to be this person's friend. So I kind of thought to myself, okay, well, what are like 2 or 3 things that I can keep in mind when I'm getting along with this person? Like I just use that as a thought experiment. And when I thought about that, I realized that I do this a lot for a lot of the novel situations that I get into. So when I'm going into like an interview, for example, like I have in mind certain things that orient me to behave in a certain way. So to be more professional, or to be better at talking about myself, and to be more open to sharing and engaging in those discussions. So I realized that my mind is sort of like this ecosystem full of different ideological species, is what I call them, like different organisms, and they're all there always, but sometimes I focus on different ones at different times, and that gives me sort of an advantage when I act in the real world. And so another thought that I had in relation to that is that these organisms sort of engage in their own natural selection. Some of them are more fit. Some of them are able to better survive in the ecosystem that I'm currently in. And those tend to thrive, and then they flourish and they reproduce. And it's as though the ideas are rising in the hierarchy of my own mind, and they're the dominant thoughts that live. So I think there were a few other things, but I can talk about them as we talk about this. But I just wanted to get your initial feedback as to what you thought about those ideas.
Yeah, no, when you sent it to me, I was like, yes, I love this. This is a great way to conceptualize the mind as an ecosystem. So I did want to clarify one thing. So You
Mhm.
called them ideological species. And if I'm getting this right, for certain situations, depending on who you're interacting with and what the situation is, you put on a different mask. And we've discussed this before. And that mask is like there's certain elements of your personalities that are elevated when you're wearing that mask. So,
Mhm.
for example, when I'm interacting with my parents, that those personalities traits that would make me a good son, whatever those traits mean, those kind of rise to the occasion
Mhm.
because from prior experience, they're most adaptive to the situation. But this kind of happens seamlessly. The transitioning between different masks, or I like to think of them as behavior patterns. That ideological species sounds a little too specific for me. Like
Mm.
they're I think they're more than ideas. They're a collection of ideas that constitute a personality. You could even say like they're persons of its own. Like you could
Mhm.
say you're a host of different persons that are living within yourself, right? So like to add to the mental ecosystem analogy, just looking at how the brain is structured and how it seems to function. So we have a tripart organization. We have the brain stem, the reptile brain, limbic system, emotional system, cortex, executive, higher functions. And we've discussed before, it's like they have different personalities or behavior patterns that
Mhm.
evolve because they help that thing thrive in the world, right? The reptilian brain helped reptiles survive for, I don't know, God knows, like hundreds of millions of years uh,
Mhm.
uh, by basic like prey detection or like threat or like run away or catch that food. And so very basic motor functions. And then we have more of the emotional, mammalian, social kind of things beginning to develop. And then we have our higher selves and our cortices, right? And it's as though they're kind of their own separate personalities. You know, when you're in a kind of primal state, when you know when you're in a kind of emotional state, and you know when you're thinking rationally. But not only is there that kind of top-down divide, there's also that left-right divide that I've talked about because um, when you talk about ideological species and ways to orient yourself in different situations, I think how the nervous system has laid itself out is that, okay, there are two fundamental situations that we can adapt to. One is
Mhm.
that of order, where we know when things are happening and we know what to expect and we can control things. And one is chaos, when the opposite is true, when we don't know what's going on. So we have two kind of parallel systems that are divided. You know, I think that's why we have the left and right brain, and I think there's good evidence to support this claim. So it's like we have these different kind of personalities. Each has its own like flip shadow side, and they're all kind of working and living together in this community that we call, you know, the mind, the mental ecosystem. And what's interesting is there's a network that's really heavily focused on, especially in psychedelic research, called the default mode network. So the default mode network is a series of tracks that run throughout the whole brain that connect a number of different parts together. And it's a very consistent, and it's activated when you're just in your resting state, right? And that's called the default mode network, like who you are when you're in your default state.
Mhm.
And a lot of people in the psychedelic research community associate the default mode network with your ego, with your sense of self. So imagine that there's this huge river or tract, neural tract flowing throughout, and it's kind of connecting all these different kind of sub personalities that we talked about, these
Mhm.
ideological species, and those species kind of working in concert with one another forms your ego, forms like yourself. You know, maybe there can be slight modulations in that network so that one part of your brain or personality can manifest itself a little more in different situations.
Mm.
And or with psychedelic compounds, you can dramatically change the connections that are formed within your default mode network. So you can have things like losing your sense of self and feeling oneness with everything around you. So like all that is to say is, yes, I think your mental ecosystem like model is a much better model looking at the brain than just your temporal lobe and parietal lobe and like hearing and say like your brain is not exactly a machine. It's a community of different sub-organisms that are working in concert, and you're kind of the executive decision making you kind of sits on top of this huge elephant. That's another analogy for the brain. It's called the rider and the elephant. You're like this tiny rider trying to control this a heaving beast, and you can't exactly control how it's going to work, but you can try to direct it. So I think that's a great model that you're like starting to tinker with. And I think it should be more accepted.
I want to talk about a specific thing that you talked about. So you mentioned the idea was a little bit, and I think that's interesting. I think what I was imagining afterwards is that so these species can work together or they can compete against each other, right? So they can be mutually beneficial. They could be mutually destructive, and perhaps like collections of organisms that exist in the ecosystem act as those characters that you were talking about, those personalities, right? One example that I was sort of working through was, okay, imagine you're going on a first date with someone, and you know you want to make a good impression, but your experience tells you that like if you're more relaxed and more comfortable, then you're going to perform better. You're going to make a better impression, right? So let's say that's one species. That's one idea that you want to uphold. And then there's this other idea that you think of that's like, okay, well, if you treat this girl as a person, and you just think, okay, we're both just human beings trying to be ourselves and find love, then you know you're going to have a more respectful and a better interaction with that person, right? So that's the second ideological species. Those two species often work very well together, right? When you acknowledge that someone is just another human being, and they're having experiences just like you feel more comfortable with them and you can be more relaxed. So those two ideas go very well together. Let's say we have a third ideological species, which is something like you have to like dominate the conversation. You have to really show that you are competent, and you have to show that you know your stuff, right? Some people do act like that when they meet someone, but that is not in. It doesn't work in conjunction with these other two species as well. Uh, so in that sense, those compete, and oftentimes, like there's either a victory of one or the other. And whatever organisms who happen to work together, ideological species that happen to work together and succeed, that sort of forms a personality. It forms a character. Otherwise, like the other one would win, and they would form that character you're talking about. So it's the idea that some species can work together and some would compete and try to dominate over the other.
Yeah, no, that I think that's like a crucial concept you bring up. It's the idea of synergy and harmony, and it's not just like a simple kind of selection, right? Where, of course, like the most dominant adaptive species, ideological species, will just rise to the top. Like like it's not quite that simple, because some species synergize well with others. Some seem fundamentally different. For example, like you should be relaxed versus you should be dominant, but they may serve, let's say, their own purposes in their own domains. Maybe there is like some interactions where you do need to be dominant, authoritative, and certain. And there's other ones where you need to be more laid back, relaxed, and receptive. But like, but it's not immediately clear which one is better, right? So you shouldn't, let's say, you shouldn't get rid of one for the sake of the other. And I think that's why fundamentally our brains are split, right? We have left and right responsible for its own domain, and we know that we have to respect each other's domains. You can have like a very domineering force, which maybe, for example, like as physicians, like giving authoritative medical advice to someone. Like yesterday, my friend asked about smoking, and I wish I knew more so I could give some authoritative and helpful advice. Sometimes you want that. Sometimes you want to be more relaxed and uncertain and open to new ideas. So like, I think that's why we have that divide. But let's get back to the idea of synergies, like, and conflict, competition, like, because oftentimes, like, you're right, we are at odds with ourselves. It's very strange. Like, let's go back to that date example. Maybe the executive you knows that the best way to like behave in that situation is just be relaxed, be yourself, have a natural conversation. But there's also the limbic system emotional you that is reacting like, oh my God, like what if things don't go well? Holy shit, like I really like this girl. I don't want to fuck things up. And it's getting you nervous, right? So it seems like there's two competing drives or competing personalities, neural systems, ideological species, whatever you want to call it. And the question is, all right, which one takes control? Which one should rise to the top? And like from the rational perspective, it's obvious that the executive function, of course, that should be what's in control. But sometimes the rest of your body doesn't submit, right? Doesn't submit to your will. And you know, I've wondered about why that happens for a long time. Like why can't I have things my way? Why won't my body like and mind listen to me? So one example I'm thinking of is a while back, like maybe 4 months ago, I wrote something about self-criticism, or I was wondering why self-criticism happens. Because it's a strange phenomena, especially when you get to like sort of some of the extremes of it, like when someone is really depressed and anxious, and when I log some of like the thoughts that I'm having in those states, it's something like, June, you're a piece of shit. Like, oh my God, you can't do anything, or like you're helpless. It's like so inflammatory and damaging, and it's like, where are those thoughts coming from? Like what is generating them, and like what adaptive purpose does it serve, if at all, right? And what I've kind of figured out, or at least the way I've understood it, is those are kind of feedback signals from your lower self, right? So if, for example, your mammalian emotional self is noticing that like you're not doing the things as much as you could that would make you like reproductively successful, because that's what's like, say, main motivation, or like you're not doing enough to like put yourself in like a good social situation. That's what the emotional social like limbic system is responsible for. Then it's going to start generating feedback signals to change your behavior. You know, at first it's going to be like little nods, like, hey, like, hey man, like you should go hang out with some people. Like, hey man, like you should go talk to that girl, like she's really pretty. Or like, but like the longer you either repress or like ignore or don't act on those signals, then I think the possibility for those signals to grow greater occurs. So things get more extreme as you repress and don't listen and don't act according to like what that signal is saying. But I think the kind of inflammatory things we hear is like it's a lot of noise. It's a low resolution like signal that you're getting. But I think the job of the executive higher you is to kind of tease that apart and like listen to that. It's like as though you're a king in like this huge city or like community, right? And you have this like crazy person that's like shouting insults at you and saying like, you're a shitty leader, like none of the people here are like getting what they want, like we're hungry and like things are wrong in like the state. And so you as the kingly leader, executive person, should listen to that and like you could chop that guy's head off and like just ignore him. Or you could like try to listen more closely and see what's at the bottom of like that suffering or like that trouble that's being generated. And when you do that, and when you act upon that, and when you make things better for like you and the people and the community that you're the king of, then you as a leader gain more respect and authority in your kingdom. And you're able to execute your will with the concordance of an agreement of your subjects. So I genuinely do believe like that's the proper way to see how the brain works and how your executive functions work. So the more that you can be a proper leader to yourself and to your entire ecosystem, the ecosystem will serve you. And so like lately I've been noticing that those kind of self-critical signals that I used to get, like they're not as strong anymore. They're not as apparent anymore. And they're nowhere near as inflammatory as like Junior piece of shit. Like that's something that wouldn't come to my mind unless I'm in a very, I don't know, very bad situation that I find myself in. But as you do the things that like make you more successful and make you, live more fully in life, I think you gain the respect and authority like over your subjects in your mental kingdom.
I vibe with that a lot, and I've noticed that as well, that the more I listen to myself, let's say I call it the body, like if my mind is the executive function and the body could be the sort of primitive or the reptilian brain, all the limbic system stuff. If I listen to my body, then I feel like I'm better integrated, and also I tend to be a lot more happy in general, which is great. Another way that I map it on to the mental ecosystem idea is this sort of idea of biodiversity. So I think it's great to have biodiversity, and the main reason is that should catastrophe happen, there's likely to be one or two species that will survive if there's a multitude of species that already exist. But if, let's say, you only have 10 to 12 dominant species in your mental ecosystem, should something drastic happen that sort of tears them apart specifically because they're built to adapt and survive in one certain way, well, if you have biodiversity, at least something is going to survive. You might not become like completely lost, I suppose, if all of your dominant ideological species are gone. And so one thing that I think is important is it's to never really discount a specific thought or idea, because at some point it could be useful. And I think people who are perhaps more open or who are more accepting of more ideas are better at doing so. And I think it makes them resilient people. I really do think that way. And it's that idea of keeping that, let's say, negative voice in the back of your head in case it becomes useful. Like that self-critical aspect. Some people would be like, okay, like I love myself. Like I don't want to put up with my own self-criticism. I'm just going to throw that out the window and not care. And the risk is, of course, becoming very egotistical or not being able to take feedback well and to grow further in life. But if you keep that voice in the back of your mind, then sometimes when you're thrown off, when there's a heavy storm and your dominant species are wiped out, at least you have some species left uh, to get you through the storm that are resilient towards that. Um, and so I feel like I'm living this way as well. Like I don't discount anything in case I need it somewhere down the line.
Hmm. Yeah, I think you're right. Biodiversity, like it's proven to produce more resilient ecosystems, because when you have things like catastrophes, like some might survive, that can help replenish the ecosystem, or when there's an external environmental threat, maybe have more ways to adapt and more ways to respond. For example, an invasive species comes, and maybe a tiny little species that you didn't really care about in your system is the solution to that invasive species, or something like that. So I like the ideas. In like practice, I think it's you need a kind of acceptance and integration of these different parts of your psyche, because there's a lot of them, and there's a lot of different personalities, and you don't know exactly when they'll be useful. Maybe one thing you could try is to expose yourself to many different situations, so that you can learn more about the value of where each trait comes in, and especially those that your weak traits, the traits that you've been maybe ignoring or suppressing or didn't value for a very long time. And I think those are the traits that those are the traits that you often hate in other people. So one thing that I really hated for some reason, like, was a trait of arrogance, and I know you've felt this way too, because we've talked about this. And whenever people came off as arrogant or like maybe all-knowing, cocky, I despised that, and I didn't necessarily know why. But I think now I have a better understanding of it. It's something you hate because of maybe you had prior bad experiences with people who possess those traits in a not so, and maybe a more of a pathological way, or maybe it's your least favored trait. Whatever the case, the things you see the least value in, I think, are some of the ones that need to be explored the most. So one part of my personality that I've been really trying to like strengthen and grow is my masculinity. And what that entails is, when I go to the gym, and when I'm pushing through that seventh rep of that 4-hour body workout program, and I'm like struggling as if like, okay, I'm gonna get through this so that like this person who has a gun to my head like doesn't shoot me. Like that's the mindset I'm approaching it with. It's like very intense, but like so intensely satisfying. And I don't think I've like engaged myself in that way very much throughout my life. Or like when I'm playing basketball. So I've been playing a lot more basketball in the last semester. And the feeling of like taking a shot and being in competition with other people like who are like very athletic, very good at what they do, and, like that spirit of competition and drive and wanting to push through obstacles, I think those are like kind of masculine traits that I want to develop in myself, that hasn't really had a chance to flourish yet. So it's like it's like slowly introducing a new species into your ecosystem,
Right.
and letting that synergize and harmonize with the other species. But it's a gradual and long process. Um, yeah, I think this mental ecosystem model is helpful.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. I really appreciate the feedback. I'm trying to do this more. I know this is usually like your thing, like the symbolic frameworks for understanding, especially something like the mind. But you know how we talked about how I like the whole symbolism of ideas, and I always thought like symbols were just to be thought of in and of themselves, um, and stories are just, especially when they're fiction, they're just fiction in and of themselves, and you know you could just add value, or you could treat them as you wanted, and they weren't inherently truthful. We talked about this before. Um, I think when I thought that, like I was being a little bit deceitful. Um, in fact, like I think in symbols all the time, which is crazy. And maybe I don't want to be the kind of person to think in symbols. Maybe I want to be more realistic, more like pragmatic, or whatever it might be, more grounded. I'm not sure what the term is. Um, but yeah, I've noticed that I do take a lot of interest in those things, and I think there was an element of contempt that was um, taught in me for that sort of idea, that sort of dreamer, being like a dreamer and being like, do you know what I mean by that?
Mm-hmm. Being creative and representing the world in maybe that kind of artistic, hands wavy, flowery way.
Right.
It's
That's certainly something that I feel like I've been repressing.
mm-hmm.
So again, 2019, new year, new me. Let's get it.
Yeah, and to talk about those kind of, so one thing we talked about is the idea of there are things that seem fundamentally incompatible with one another, but at the end they're both serving to like adapt to the same reality, or they're two perspectives on the same situation.
Mm-hmm.
And like there's a really good diagram that I can't pull up, but maybe this is a good visual 3D visualization exercise. So imagine that you have what is it? I can't even remember, but I think it's a cylinder.
Okay.
Is it a cylinder? or it's a cylinder, and as a 2D, imagine that you are a 2D being.
And I think I know what you're talking about.
Right.
It's like
right.
there's a light casting on the cylinder,
Mm-hmm.
and from one perspective, it looks like a square on the wall.
Oh, yeah, it looks like a rectangle.
Rectangle, yeah, and then on the other side, it looks like a circle.
Right. And they're representing two parts of the same reality,
Mm-hmm.
but from the limited two-dimensional perspective, like those seem fundamentally incompatible to you. Like the circle is the square and they're the same thing, but they're pointing to the same thing. Like what does that mean?
Right.
So that's kind of the way I think about like our rational and creative minds, right? They seem fundamentally incompatible, and they're kind of like separated into these boxes that we have, different categories for like how we see the world, but they're descriptions of the same reality. So our what material models of how the brain works as like a artificial intelligence system, like you can do the calculations, you can map out the brain anatomy and blah blah blah. Like you can understand the brain that way, and that's a powerful way to understand the brain. Or you can understand it in the realm of like personalities, ecosystems, and things working in concert in a hierarchy. And both are equally valid descriptions of the brain, but they seem incompatible with one another because there's no immediate link between the two. But once you can hold both of them in concert, it becomes like very powerful. The strengths and weaknesses of both are like very apparent, and I think Western materialist culture praises or like places a very high emphasis on the rational way to see things and do things. So I very encourage like exploration of symbolism and those different ways of viewing the world.
Very cool. I think that's a good place to end off. Final note, explore those symbolic and creative sides. It's definitely something that I'm going to be working on in 2019. So yeah, any last comments before we close off? Think.
Yeah, no. Paul, have a good 18.
Oh, thank you.
I'll see you in the new year, and we can talk about our schedules and hang out before the break ends.
Yeah, let's do that. Let's see our real faces for one. All right. Thanks for listening, guys. Take care.